Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to TechGeek webinar series, our endeavor to empower techies. We believe that sharing of knowledge is the key to enhance our skills and grow us as professionals. With this principle in mind, we have initiated a series of webinars conducted by industry experts to give you all a crisp insight of various domains. The topic of today's session is Track Project Actual against Project Baseline Information. This is the 8th session in the Microsoft Project 2010 series. This series is being conducted by our guest speaker, Mr. B. Sai Prasad, who is a Senior Manager Learning and Development in Cognizant Technology Solutions India Private Limited. So without further delay, I introduce you all to our guest speaker. Over to you, Mr. Sai.
Thank you, Mohini. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all participants. As we all know, this is the 8th session of the Project 2010 series, where we are going to look at how do we record actuals so that we can compare against the baseline to know the progress of the project. So just a quick recap, in the first 7 sessions we talked about how to set up the project, and we talked about how to change the working time. And in the 3rd session, we talked about how to create the work breakdown structure and how to set dependencies. The 4th session was about adding resource information in terms of people, material, and cost. In the 5th session, we talked about different options in terms of how to assign the resources, both people and material, and cost to your activities. In the 6th session, we talked about how to convert your draft schedule to an optimized schedule by making use of the resource optimization techniques. In the last session, we were talking about how do we do baselining with respect to Project 2010. So today we will be talking about how do you track project actuals so that we can compare it within your project baseline. So the key takeaways of this 1-hour webinar would be to understand what is the right strategy for updating your actuals. We will also talk about how do you update your task level actuals in terms of actual start, actual finish, and the remaining duration. At the assignment level, we will also look at how do you record your actual work, remaining work, and the actual start and the actual finish date. So before we get into the strategies and the options, I'm just going back to my project 2010. So this is a plan which we are going to use as a demo for this webinar. So as you can see, we have a set of activities, and these activities have been sequenced by making use of the predecessor column. We also have a set of resources assigned to these activities. So just a quick recap, in order to baseline this complete project, so I'm just going to go to the view ribbon where I will change my table from entry to baseline. You can see my current project plan is not yet baseline, so let me baseline it first before we move on to recording actuals. So the first step is to do a baseline, go to the project tab and just use this set baseline option. And make sure that you have selected the current baseline as baseline and it for the entire project. So the moment you do a baseline, you can see that baseline data is automatically set in terms of duration, start, finish, and work. Remember, baselining is very critical before you start recording your actuals. Now let me go back to my entry table. So one of the common ways by which people start recording actuals, so I'll give you a small demo for it. So I've seen people inserting a column called as a percent complete column, which you are able to see as the first field here. So what happens is when you try to record your percentage complete, project might behave in a totally different way. So let's take the example of an activity like develop the preliminary budget activity, row number 10. So when I say this activity is 100% complete, you are able to see this activity has been marked as completed, but you can see that this activity is happening on a future date. So let's assume that the current or the status date of your project is 27th, which means as on that date you are trying to record your actuals. So when you are trying to provide a percentage complete for an activity, irrespective of whether this is happening before the status date or after the status date, Microsoft Project just assumes that I just need to record its percentage complete. Another opposite is if I go to the row number 8, conduct need analysis. and I say this activity is only 20% complete, which means the remaining 80% of the need analysis can ideally be pushed on or after the status date. So naturally, updating your percentage complete will not give you a clear progress. Secondly, when you are trying to record your percentage complete, you can see none of these activities have moved. The reason is it assumes that the activity are planned to be completed in the original estimates. So it might happen that the remaining duration of these activities might be more than the estimates. So I'm going to undo these changes what I have done first. So let's go back to these slides and talk about the strategies first. Remember, there are two different ways by which you can record your or update your actuals. The first option is you can update at a task level. The second option is you can update at an assignment level. When we talk about task, we are more focusing on recording your actual start date, your actual duration, your remaining duration, and your actual finish. Remember, based on this information, the percentage complete will get automatically calculated. So when you try to record these data at a task level, Microsoft Project automatically updates the assignments of these activities. So for example, if I say an activity has started on January 1st and its duration is 5 days, so project assumes that on those 5 days you have done 8 hours of work per day. So naturally the actual hours on a daily basis will be 8 hours. On the opposite side, you can also look at recording the actuals more at an assignment level. So for instance, if you are recording your actual work or the remaining work by resources or by day or by assignments, naturally the task which gets affected by this assignment will get automatically updated. So let's look at the few steps which we need to do before we start updating your actuals. The first step is I recommend you change your view to what we call as a tracking Gantt view, because this will help you to understand whether your project is baselined or not, and you will also be able to compare your current plan with your baseline. So let me first change my table or my view to tracking Gantt. So I'll go to the task ribbon. You can see there is a views group. I'm going to change my views to tracking Gantt. Now you are able to see that for all these activities, you can see there is a black color bar that is drawn below all these activities. The black color just represents these activities having baseline, whereas the top bar ideally represents these activities are your current plan. You might also observe that all these activities are falling on your critical path, and that's the reason it has been marked in red color. So the first step is I'm making sure my view is in tracking Gantt, which you can see on your sidebar. The next step is I'm going to change my table, which is within this view, to tracking. So go to the view ribbon and just change the table to tracking. So when you change it to tracking, you can see there are a few set of fields that are displayed here. To start with, you have the actual start, actual finish, the percentage complete, the physical percentage complete, the actual duration, the remaining duration, and other columns. What I recommend is not all the columns would be useful for us. The reason being, if you have prepared a schedule that is more duration oriented, naturally you might not want to record your actual work or your remaining work. But if your schedule is more effort oriented, where you have done an effort based estimation, naturally you might want to have your actual work in this case. So I'm just going to hide my actual work because let's assume we have done a duration based scheduling. The second column is, you can see this percentage complete column is an editable field. But the challenge what we have with this percentage complete is, it does not consider your status date as a reference date. So if I say an activity is 50% complete, whether it happens before the status date or after the status date, the successor activities will not get rescheduled. So the first step is, I don't want you to use the percentage complete column as an input field, rather use it more as an output field in this case. The second step is, before we start recording the actuals, I ensure that the status date has been set. The status date is the date on which you are collecting the actuals from your team, okay, and your stakeholders. So in this example, we are assuming that the status date of this project is to be 27th of December 2012. The second step is, we would like to have the status date as a reference date on my screen. so that we will be able to know which activity should be before status date and which activity happens after the status date. So I will go to the format ribbon where you can see there is an option called grid lines. Let me select the grid lines option, and I'm just going to select the status date as the lines to change. So by default, the status date line will not be shown on your Gantt chart. So let me change the line and let me give a color to it. You can now observe that there is a small red color line which stands for the status date of your current project. So as per your current project plan, activities that are before the status date should be updated. Activities that are happening after the status date are something which is yet to start. Now I'm just going to give you a few scenarios which you need to remember. So just a quick recap. What we did was we just looked at changing the view to tracking Gantt, and we also changed the table to tracking table. So the second step is we need to have the status date set using the project tab. And the third point which I wanted to mention is, remember on the third or the fourth session of the series, I was mentioning about what we call as task type. Just to give you a quick recap, when you double click any activity, on your advanced tab you can see for any task you can have one of these three types. A task can be fixed duration, or it can be fixed units, or fixed work. What I mean by fixed duration does not change. Whereas when I say the work is fixed, which means the total effort of that particular task is fixed. For example, if you have done a duration-based estimation, naturally I recommend that you don't have it as a fixed duration, because as you start recording your actuals, you might want to revise the duration of those activities. So the recommended task type is have it as fixed units and not have it as fixed work or fixed duration. So by default for all your activities, the task type will be fixed units. Now let me go back to the slides. We are going to talk about different scenarios so that we can look at on a case-by-case basis which option is the best effective way for recording your actuals. So the first scenario is, let's assume that there is a task in a schedule that ran as per schedule. So which means that that activity is 100% complete. So there are two ways of doing it. You can go to the tracking table and say the percent complete is 100, or you can use the task ribbon and say that activity is 100% complete. Let me go back to my project. So let me say that my prepare or my determine the project scope, this activity is 100% complete. One option is you can say this activity is 100% complete by making use of this column, percentage complete column. The second one is you can go to the task ribbon where you can see there are a few percentage complete options available. So you just need to choose that this activity is 100% complete. So the moment you say that 100% complete, you can see that the activity's remaining duration is 0, and you can see that the project has automatically calculated the start date and the finish date of that particular task. You can see there is a column called physical percentage complete. Remember, this column indicates the output completion. For example, you might say that the this duration of this activity is only 2 hours. Okay, which means it is only 50% complete. But in terms of output or the deliverable, it might be 75% complete. So depending on what the output you are trying to measure, you might try to enter the physical percentage complete column here. So I'm just going to undo it and have it as 100% complete. The second way by which you can update your actuals is, there are certain activities in your project that is running as per schedule. Remember, these activities are in progress, or these activities may have been completed. So, but it has been running as per your schedule. So for using this, we are going to use an option called Mark on Track, which is there on your task ribbon. So let me select a couple of activities. Let's say that I'm selecting my secure project sponsorship activity. So rather than using this percentage column, I can make use of this Mark on Track option. So when I use this Mark on Track option, if this activity is happening before the status date, automatically the percentage complete column will get updated to 100. But if this activity falls after the status date, naturally this activity's percentage complete will be 0. So let's have a short demo of it. I've selected row number 3 and let me say mark on track. You can see that this activity's actual start, actual finish is getting automatically updated, and even its actual duration is also getting updated. So one of the points I would like you to remember is, whenever you are trying to record your actuals, ask your team members more than the actual duration, ask them what would be the remaining duration of this activity. So here in both the cases, we are assuming that you have consumed the same amount of time what you have estimated. But let's assume that the secure project sponsorship, you have taken more time to complete. You can go to the actual duration column and just revise it to 2 days. So the moment you say it to 2 days, the actual finish gets updated to a later date, and you can see the successors of all these activities are getting automatically pushed to a later date. So now let me take another example. I'm going to take a task which is falling on the status date. I hope you guys can see that there is an activity that falls before and after the status date. So if I say this task is mark on track, you can see it is only 17% complete. Because it is only 17% of the task is happening before the status date. So the remaining percentage is falling after the status date. If I select an activity that falls after the status date and I say it is mark on track, naturally that activity's percentage complete will not get updated. So in this demonstration, I was talking about those activities that are running as per schedule, which means that you don't need to revise your planned duration in this case. The third scenario is there are certain activities that are running behind, which means you are having an activity which has started in the past, but it got interrupted in between. Which means when you have an interruption, the remaining portion of that work can be done only on or after a status date. So let me go back to my example, and let's say that we have an activity called define the preliminary resources. I'm saying that this activity is has started on time, and let me say this activity started on 17th of December, okay? And I'm just going to say that it's only 25% of the work is completed, which means the remaining 75% of the work should be moved on or after the status date. So I'm just going to select all the activities, and I go to the task ribbon where you have an option called move. You can select the option called move the incomplete part to the status date. So any activity that is scheduled before the status date will get automatically moved on or after the status date. Now you'll be able to observe that activity got split into 2 pieces, one happening in the past, another happening on or after the status date. The fourth scenario is there are certain activities that is running as per plan, but it took longer or shorter to complete. So for example, we have an activity, let's say conduct need analysis. This activity is progressing as per your current plan. Okay, so we are just taking the same example. So let's say this activity got completed as per the original plan, and we say this task is 100% complete. But if this activity took more than 1 day to complete, you just need to revise the actual duration to, let's say, 3 days. And if you have more work to be done, just revise the remaining duration to 2 days more. You can see based on your actual and your remaining, which means since 3 days of work is completed out of 5 days, the percentage complete has been calculated as 60%. The last option we are going to look at is there are certain activities that would have started early or that would have started late. So it is again the same option. You just need to use this mark on track option, but with one small change. For example, let's assume we have this task, secure the core resources, and we say that this activity has completed as per your status date. So though it might look it started on time, you might want to revise its actual start date to a later date. So let me say it started only on 26, which means its total duration has not changed, but the date when it started and finished is ideally getting affected. So these are the strategies which you ideally need to use in terms of updating your task. Now let's move on to the next strategy of updating your assignments. We all know assignment is all about who is doing which activity, and this will allow you control over how many hours is spent by the individual resource on the days of the week. So for which you just need to change your view to the resource usage. So let me first change my view to resource usage. So by default, you can see the resource usage list. In the level 1, you will be able to see the list of resources. And in level 2, you will have the list of activities assigned to that particular resource. So let me first hide all the assignments. So I'll go to the format ribbon and I will say, I'll go to the view ribbon and I will say I will hide all the subtasks. So now you are able to see just the resource names here. Some of you might wonder why some of these resources are in red color, because they are over allocated and it is an unoptimized schedule. So let's talk about this activity which we are focusing now, which is you are determining the project scope, we are trying to secure the sponsorship and reviewing the functional specifications. So if you want to record your actuals at an assignment level, I recommend that you just need to change the table to the work table. So just go to the view and just change the table to what we call as work. Remember, the work table will give you more information about the activities that are assigned to the resources. For example, if you look at the determined project scope, which has been assigned to the team called management, this activity is 100% complete. And you can see that this activity total effort you have spent is 4 hours, and what has been approved by the customer is also 4 hours. So the variance is automatically 0. So if you want to record it at an assignment level, you can go here and say, naturally you would not have spent 4 hours, let's say you have spent 8 hours of time. So you can go ahead and revise it here also. Let's take another activity. For example, let's talk about the uptime approvals to proceed. This activity, if you look at it, I have not recorded the actuals. So for example, I say that this activity took 8 hours to complete, which means the remaining hours is 0. Okay? And this activity is assumed to be completed because I took more than what I originally estimated. And let's say for this activity, I want to record a remaining effort for it. So you have taken 8 hours and you need another 2 more hours to complete it. So the total effort required for completing this task is 10 hours. So since 8 hours of work is completed in 10 hours, the work complete is 80%. So now let me scroll to that particular task. So you can see that the work has been divided across 2 days. On the first day it is 4 hours, on the second day it is 6 hours. So though it is not very clear what work is, we are going to add a few more rows on the assignments. So let me go to the format ribbon and I'm just going to check the actual work. When I check the actual work, you are able to see for this specific activity, I have recorded my actual work here as 4 hours and 4 hours, which is here. And you also have a remaining, maybe let me scroll to the other side. Yeah, I think it's right. So since out of 6 hours of work that has been planned, only 4 hours is completed on Tuesday. Okay. So you can also go at the day level and say, maybe I want to say that on Tuesday, he has taken only 4 hours of work. But the remaining 2 hours of work that is scheduled on Tuesday is moved to Wednesday here. Which means that remaining effort is still not altered, but you can see the start date and the finish date of that particular activity would have been affected. So the option what we have seen is you just need to change the view to the resource usage and change your tables to the work table. The next step is, as I have already mentioned, you need to have your task type to fixed units so that whether you are doing an effort-based update or a duration-based update, it does not have any conflict. then make sure you are adding your work and your actual work so that those are displayed as two different rows on your screen. So the actual work represents the total effort you have spent on that day, whereas work generally represents the actual work plus the remaining work on that particular day. Fine, so let's look at some questions what participants have. Participants, if you have any questions, please go to your Q&A and just share your questions, please. So Mohini, are you there? Can I just have the questions? Okay, good. So I've started receiving the questions. Let's look at one by one. After updating, okay, so this is a question from Shrikant. Okay, so after updating once, how do I save the data for future reference? I mean that at the end of the 5th week, would I be able to see the week 1 data if required? Remember, it is the same set of columns which you are trying to update. So naturally, you will not have a record about the first week actuals or the second week actuals because you are going to use the same columns to update the data. So the second question is, what if the task is assigned to more than one resource and one of the resource uses more than the time planned for the task, but the other resource is not yet completed its part? Okay, so to answer this question, we can use the resource usage what you are now looking at. As you can see that so the resource usage is more grouped by resources, correct? So you can ideally change your view to what we call as the task usage. In your task usage, if you see, a task might have multiple resources. So let's take this activity, what I'm looking at. You have the review software specification, which has been assigned to two resources, project manager and the analyst. So your question is, let's assume the one resource is taking more time, whereas other resource has not actually started. So you can just go to the view ribbon and just change it to tracking. So naturally, for each of the resources, you can provide their own individual actual start date and the actual finish date. And if the other resource has not actually started that work, but he needs more time or he needs to revise its estimate, so you can just try to increase the remaining duration or the actual work of that particular resource. let's look at the third question. How can we see percentage complete of a project by a given date? Okay. This is something to do with reporting, but this is a very simple and a direct way of doing it. You just need to ensure that you are in some Gantt chart and just insert a column called percentage complete. You can see the percentage complete of this project is currently stands as 4%. But if you look at a phase level, it might say for scoping is 76% complete, analysis is 3% complete. It is purely calculated based on how much of progress is being done on the subtask of that phase. How can we track actuals against multiple baselines? You can track actuals with respect to only one baseline, or but you have an option in Microsoft Project through which you can try to compare your actuals with multiple baselines by going to the format ribbon. I hope you can see there is an option called slippage. So I can just say I want to know the slippage of all activities in my project with respect to the first baseline. So you can see since the second activity, securing project sponsorship, got delayed, you can see the other activities in your project also got delayed. So the black color line here stands for the slipping task here. So for example, if I have multiple baselines, you can also say that, let's assume baseline 1 was having the older version of your baseline, and if I select baseline 1, naturally you will be able to see this black color line. So in this demonstration, I don't have multiple baselines, but this is how you can try to compare your current baseline with multiple baselines. How do you sync your project plan task to Outlook and to fill the actuals by team members instead of using project server? Remember, this is not directly possible, okay? So you might need to go to some third-party utilities or plugins that will take care of importing the data from your Outlook. So by default, the desktop version of project does not support your team members recording actuals in Outlook, and you can synchronize it automatically. If we add remaining work to the task, should the task be rebaselined? Remember, if you are trying to add remaining work and that is approved by the customer, you ideally need to go for a rebaseline. But if there is, you are trying to revise the remaining work because your estimation was not good or because of the risk, naturally you should not go for a rebaselining in that case. Say I have estimated my task to start on a certain date, but due to some dependency it got delayed. How should I make the correction in my project plan? Okay. So going back to my Gantt chart, I said there are, I can say there are 3 tables which you guys need to know. So the first table is what we already talked about as the entry table. Remember, the entry table contains your planned start date and your planned finish date of your project. What I mean by the planned start date is it is your current start date and the current finish date of all these activities in the project. Whereas the baseline table tells you what has been approved or the approved start date and the finish dates. So these are dates that should not be changed. So your question is, how do I delay an activity which is not starting as per my current plan? So you just need to go to the entry table. So let's take an example of an activity. For example, let's say, let me hide the slippages. So let's look at row number 16 here. We have a task called secure the required resources. So as per my current plan, it needs to start on 16th and complete on 16th. But due to some reason, it's starting on a date later, okay? So if you want to push it to a later date, okay, due to some external dependency, you just need to double click that particular task and you say this task will not start as soon as possible. Rather, it will start only on or after a particular date, okay? So in this example, let me say it starts only on 1/18. You can see that that particular activity would have had a constraint, and you can see this activity is now scheduled only on or after a particular date, and the successors of this activity is getting affected. So if you want to change the planned start date or the planned finish date, you just need to go to your entry table and just make the change. But if you are going to record your actuals, go to your tracking table. That's where you need to record your actuals as actual start date and actual finish date. Now let me move on to the next question. What are the various methods of avoiding over allocation? Okay. And just this is something which is a bit outside the scope, but I'm going to take a small example in this case. Let's say that we have two activities were planned. Okay, so we will say we have task 1, task 2. We have these 4 set of activities, and I'm just going to set some dependencies between these activities in a random fashion. So let's say after the first task completes, the second activity can start. After the second, the third. The fourth is dependent on 1, and the last activity is dependent on 3, 4. Now you can observe that these activities have been sequenced, and let me assign some resources to it. So the first step is I just go to your resource sheet where I'm having a resource called, let's say, R1, R2, and R3. So I'm going to assign resources such that they are over allocated. So let me say first activity is done by R1, second activity is done by the second resource, third. Okay. Fine. So the first step what I'm going to make is I'm going to understand the critical path of this project first before we talk about over allocation. So as you can see, it is the first part that is falls on the critical path, and you can see that T1 and T4, you can see there is a small red color stickman appearing. This means that that task is having a overloaded resource. So to fix the problem, I just need to do a mouse over on top of it, and I'll just right click. There are a few options available to you. You can either ignore the problem, or you can reschedule that particular activity to a later date, or you can fix it by using advanced options. So before I try to talk about rescheduling or fixing it through Task Inspector, let's assume we are ignoring that problem. When we ignore that problem, that red color stickman will disappear. It does not mean there is no over allocation. If I go to the resource sheet, you will see the resource is still marked in red color. So on my Gantt chart, if I just want to show the problems, I'll just go to the inspect and say show ignored problems now. So before we look at how do we resolve it, you need to decide whether the option what you are going to decide, you are going to choose, should it affect your critical path or not. If the task what you are going to delay should affect your critical path, I recommend that you select the non-critical activity and just say reschedule this activity to the next available date. The moment you do it, you can see this activity got moved to a later date without affecting your project finish date. Let me undo this change and let me go to the T2 and repeat the same step. If I reschedule it to the next available date, you can see that project gives you a problem saying that it cannot resolve the over allocation of R2. The reason is it was falling on your critical path. So in order to fix this problem, I'll just go to the resource tab where you have an option called leveling options. So in the leveling options, these are the set of checkboxes which you need to remember. So here the first option says, when you try to delay an activity, it should be delayed only within its available slack. So let me uncheck that option and say OK, and let me redo this step again. So I have selected T2 and say reschedule it to the next available date. You can see now my project finish date is getting affected. So first identify the critical path and just look at which activity is having over allocation and try to resolve it that way. The second way by which you can try to resolve this rather than delaying activities is you can swap your resources. So I'm just going to go to the last option called Fix in Task Inspector. On the Task Inspector, it gives you an option called Team Planner. Team Planner, as we already discussed, is the view that has been added in Project 2010. So through the Team Planner, you will be able to clearly see what are the two set of activities due to which the resource is overloaded. So you can find both R1 and R3 are available on those 2 days. So you can just drag it. You can just drag that particular activity and just move it to the day when that resource is available. So the moment you do it, please remember, project automatically sets a constraint for the moved activity. So, or in other words, you can see on that tooltip, the constraint type of T4 has been changed to start no earlier than. So let me open that particular task and I'll go to the advanced tab and let me say this activity should start as soon as possible. You can see the red color of the resource as well as the task would have disappeared in this case. So to learn more about optimization, I recommend that you go through the session 6 or session 7 of the series to know more about it. Now let's take the next question. What is the most appropriate way for assigning resources when more than one resource is needed to complete an activity? So I'm just going to go back to the same example what I'm using. Let's say that for the activity T4, which is planned to be completed in 1 day by one resource, you want to assign another resource. There are multiple ways to do it. You can just double click that particular task and go to the resource tab where you can try to choose which resource you want to work here. So for example, if I am trying to select R2 should also work on this activity, you can see that forget the overallocation part, but you can see for this specific activity, let me insert the work. You can see that this activity is now can be completed in 1 day, but since 2 people are working, it is 16 hours. But for example, if you want to say the first resource should work for 4 hours and the remaining 12 hours for the other resource, then naturally this option will not help because this option mainly focuses on how much of is their working time should they work on that particular activity. So I recommend you split the view by making use of the split view option on your view ribbon. So make sure that you have selected task form, and on the bottom you can ideally say for T4, so R3 should work for 12 hours and R2 should work for 4 hours on this activity. Now you can see this activity is now completed in 1.5 days. Another enhancement of this option is you can just right click your task form and select the schedule. So through the schedule, you can have you also have control over when should this resource start this activity. So currently it assumes both these resources will start working on this activity on the same date. For example, due to unavailability, you want R3 to start on, let's say, 18th. You can see that between these two start dates, 14 and 18, 14 is happening earlier, so that is the task start date. Between the finish date, the late date is 19, naturally the task finish date is 19th of December. So these are the options which you can ideally use for assigning single as well as multiple resources. When you have multiple tasks and the same resources working on them, what is the best way to view the resource allocation task-wise if the project is so large? Okay. How do I look at the multiple tasks for the same resource? One option would be you can go to the resource usage. Okay. So when you look at the resource usage, it will ideally tell you what are the list of activities that are assigned to that specific resource. But if you are more looking for a report, okay, you can just go to the project ribbon and you have a tabular report option available. Through the tabular reports, you can double click the assignments and you can open the to-do list report where I can say which reports I want, which resource list I want to look at. Let me say I'm selecting R2 here and I'll say OK. You can see the list of activities that are assigned to R2 are being displayed in this case. If you want to change the columns that are being displayed in this, I will go to the project, report, to-do list and I will edit it. And you can select what data you want to display. For example, rather than displaying the current plan, you might want to show them the customer approved start date and finish date. So you can just change the table to baseline and let me say OK and run this report. Now you are able to see the same set of activities. You will be able to have columns related to baseline. Good. So thank you, participants. So before we recap, let's quickly summarize what we have seen. So we have talked about different ways by which you can record your actuals. So the first way would be you can look at recording your percentage complete. But remember, when you're trying to record your percentage complete, the level of detail you are recording is very, very low, because project assumes that the activity would be completed within the given duration. The second way of recording the actuals is you can either go to the task usage or to the resource usage, and where you can provide the actual start date, actual finish date, and the actual work. But still the level of detail is very low because you are trying to record more at a task or an assignment level. If you want to record at a time-based level, I recommend that using your task usage or the resource usage, make use of the time-based portion so that you can record how much of effort has been spent and how much of effort has been pending on the remaining days of that week. So good. So thank you. So if you have any questions, you can write to me. The email address has been provided on your screens. So I hope today's session was useful to you. And the next session would be on reporting and how do we look at variance with respect to your projects. Thank you. So over to Mohini. Mohini, are you there? Okay, participants, thank you and have a great day. Thank you.
Mr. Sai, are you there? I've already assigned you some questions. Are you able to see them?
Yeah, I have answered all those questions, Mohini.
I've assigned some more.
Okay, because I was not able to see that, so
Okay.
we just concluded the program.
Thank you so much then, Mr. Sai.
Thank
The
you.
recording of the session would be available on techgeek.com by evening. Thank you all. Have a great evening.